Hey everyone, my name is Rosa and I'm 67 years old. I need to tell you this story because, well, you're going to find it hard to believe what family can do to you when money's involved. I've been a widow for 8 years now. My husband Carlos and we built our life from nothing. Came to this country with 2 suitcases and dreams bigger than our bank account. We worked construction together. Yes, together. While he laid foundation and framed houses, I did the electrical work. People used to stare at this tiny Mexican woman pulling wire through walls. But Carlos always said I had steadier hands than any man he knew. We saved every penny for 35 years, every single penny. No fancy vacations, no expensive cars. We drove the same pickup truck for 15 years until the engine literally died on us. But we had a dream, to own our own piece of land where we could grow old together, and we did it. We bought 47 acres of the most beautiful ranch, land you've ever seen, about 2 hours outside the city. Rolling hills, a creek that runs year-round, and the most incredible sunsets that paint the sky like God's own masterpiece every single evening. Carlos and I built our dream house there with our own hands. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a wraparound porch where we'd sit every evening watching the deer come down to drink from the creek. But life had other plans. Carlos died suddenly of a heart attack when he was only 62. One day he was fixing the fence gate, joking about how the cows were getting too smart for their own good, and the next day I was picking out his coffin. The grief nearly killed me. I'm not being dramatic. I literally lost 30 pounds in 2 months because food tasted like cardboard and sleep felt like betrayal, but I survived. I had to. Carlos and I never had children of our own. We tried for years, but it just wasn't meant to be. Instead, we poured all our love into our nieces and nephews. My sister Maria's 3 kids became like our own. We helped put them through college. We're there for every graduation, every birthday, every milestone. The youngest, David, became a successful lawyer. I was so proud of him. You have to understand, in our family, he was the first one to get a professional degree, the first one to wear a suit to work instead of work boots. When he graduated law school, I cried like he was my own son. After Carlos died, David started visiting me more often. At first, I thought it was just because he cared. He'd drive out to the ranch every few weeks, help me with paperwork, fix things around the house. He was always so concerned about me living alone, always asking if I was managing okay financially. Tia, Rosa, he'd say, using the pet name he'd called me since he was little. You know you can't keep managing this big property by yourself forever, right? I'd laugh it off. Mijo, I'm not dead yet. I can still outwork men half my age. And it was true. I kept that ranch running like Carlos and I always had. I had a small herd of cattle, grew my own vegetables, even sold some produce at the local farmers market on weekends. The ranch wasn't just my home. It was my independence, my legacy, my proof that 2 kids from a small Mexican village could build something beautiful in America. But David kept pressing. Every visit, he'd bring up my age, my health, the burden of maintaining such a large property. He started bringing his girlfriend, Jennifer, this perfectly polished blonde woman who worked in real estate. She'd walk around my property like she was already measuring it for sale signs. Rosa, she'd say, in that condescending tone that some people use when they think you don't speak English well enough to catch their disrespect. Have you thought about what happens to all this when you're gone? Wouldn't it be easier to simplify? Now? Easier for who, I always wondered, but I kept my mouth shut. David seemed happy with her, and I didn't want to cause problems. Then about 18 months ago, David came to visit with a manila folder tucked under his arm and an expression I'd never seen before. Too eager, like a kid who knows he's about to get away with something. Tia Rosa, I've been thinking about your situation a lot, he said, settling into the chair where Carlos used to sit every evening. The audacity of that still makes my blood boil. You know, you never updated your will after Uncle Carlos died. That could cause real problems for the family if something happens to you. He was right about that. After Carlos passed, updating our will was one of those things that kept getting pushed to tomorrow, then next week, then next month. Grief has a way of making you avoid anything that reminds you of mortality. I know, mijo, I said. I keep meaning to get around to it. Well, that's why I'm here. He opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. I took the liberty of drafting a new will for you. Family rate, completely free. All you have to do is sign, and you'll have peace of mind knowing everything is handled properly. I should have known something was wrong right then. David had never offered to help with legal documents before, and suddenly he's volunteering his expensive lawyer services for free? But I trusted him. This was Maria's boy, the kid I'd helped raise, the young man I'd been so proud to see succeed. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, reaching for the papers. But David pulled them back slightly. Actually, Tia, there's one more thing. I also prepared some estate planning documents, to make sure the transfer of your assets is as smooth as possible when the time comes. It's all very standard stuff, but it will save the family thousands in probate costs. Estate planning, probate costs. He was throwing around legal terms like confetti, and I felt embarrassed that I didn't understand everything he was saying. You have to understand, Carlos and I, we were smart people, but we were working class smart. We knew how to build things, fix things, grow things, but legal documents, that was foreign territory. Just show me where to sign, I said, and that's exactly what David did. He flipped through the pages quickly, pointing to signature lines, explaining in rapid-fire Spanish mixed with English that this section was about medical decisions, this part was about property distribution, this clause was about tax implications. My head was spinning. The documents were thick, full of legal language that might as well have been hieroglyphics. David kept reassuring me that it was all standard, all for my protection, all to make things easier for everyone. You trust me, right? Tia, he said, flashing that smile that had been melting hearts since he was 5 years old. Of course I trusted him. This was family. So I signed. Page after page after page. My hand was cramping by the end, but David seemed so pleased, so relieved. Perfect, he said, gathering up all the papers. I'll get these filed properly, and you're all set. No more worrying about legal stuff. Your nephew has you covered. He hugged me goodbye, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I wasn't carrying the weight of everything alone. Maybe having a lawyer in the family was exactly the blessing I needed, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. David left that day with an energy I'd never seen before, almost excited, and Jennifer, who usually just tolerated these family visits, seemed practically giddy as they drove away. I tried to shake the feeling. Paranoia wasn't like me. Carlos always said I was too trusting for my own good, but I'd rather be too trusting than live my life suspicious of everyone's motives. Still, that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those papers, all those signatures. I'd signed documents before, when we bought the ranch, when we refinanced, when Carlos and I made our original wills. But this felt different, more permanent somehow. The weeks passed, and David's visits became less frequent. When he did come by, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, always in a hurry to leave, and he started asking weird questions. Tia, have you thought about maybe spending some time closer to the city? You know, where medical care is easier to access. Are you still doing all that physical work around the property? Have you considered what you'd do if you got hurt out here all alone? These weren't the caring questions of a concerned nephew. These were leading questions, the kind lawyers ask when they are building a case. Then, about 6 months ago, something happened that should have been my first real red flag. I was at the farmer's market, selling my tomatoes and peppers like I did every Saturday morning when Mrs. Chen, who runs the flower stand next to mine, made a comment that stopped me cold. "Rosa, honey, I heard you're thinking about selling the ranch. That's such a shame. I know how much that place means to you." I nearly dropped the box of peppers I was carrying. "Selling? Who told you I was selling?" Mrs. Chen looked embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. It's just that Jennifer, your nephew's girlfriend, she was in the grocery store last week, telling people that the family ranch would be available soon. She seemed to think it was common knowledge." My hands started shaking. Not the kind of shaking you get when you're cold, but the kind that comes from deep in your bones when your body realizes something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. "There must be some misunderstanding," I managed to say. But even as the words came out, I knew there wasn't. I drove home from the market that day with my mind racing. Why would Jennifer be telling people my ranch was going to be available? Available? For what? And why hadn't David mentioned anything about this to me? That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Carlos died. I called my sister Maria. Maria and we'd had our differences over the years. Nothing major, just the usual sibling stuff that gets complicated when money and family expectations get involved. But she was still my sister, and David was still her son. "Maria, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course, Rosa. What's wrong? You sound upset. Has David said anything to you about me selling the ranch?" There was a pause. A long pause. The kind of pause that tells you everything you need to know before a single word is spoken. "Rosa, what exactly did David tell you when he helped you?" "With your will." And that's when I knew. That sick feeling in my stomach, that nagging worry that had been keeping me up at night. It wasn't paranoia. It was intuition. He said he was updating my will and doing some estate planning to make things easier for the family. Another pause. Longer this time. "Rosa, David mentioned to me that you'd decided to make some changes, to simplify things, while you're still healthy enough to make your own decisions. Simplify things. Make changes. The euphemisms were making my head spin. What kind of changes, Maria?" He said you'd decided to transfer ownership of the ranch to the family trust while you're still alive, so you could see the family, benefit from your generosity instead of waiting until later. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the kitchen floor. Transfer ownership. While I'm still alive, I'd signed away my ranch, my home, my life's work, the legacy that Carlos and I had built with our own hands, with our own sweat, with 35 years of sacrifice and dreams, and I'd done it willingly, trustingly, like a lamb walking into the slaughterhouse. But wait, you haven't heard the best part yet, because what I discovered next, what I found out about what I'd actually signed, it's going to make you as angry as it made me. See, I may be 67 years old, and I may not understand legal jargon, but I'm not stupid, and I definitely wasn't going to let my nephew steal everything Carlos and I worked for without a fight. The next morning, I drove straight to town to see Fernando Gutierrez, the notary public who'd helped Carlos and me with all our important documents over the years. Fernando had been our friend for 20 years. He'd notarized our mortgage papers, our business licenses, even renewed our passports when we finally took that trip back to Mexico to visit Carlos's dying mother. Fernando took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. "Rosa, ¿qué pasó? You look like you've seen a ghost." I handed him the copies of the documents David had left with me, because even in my shocked state, I'd been smart enough to keep copies. Fernando's face got darker and darker as he read through the papers. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure anger. "Rosa, do you understand what you signed here?" My nephew said it was a will update and some estate planning. This isn't a will, Rosa. This is a deed transfer. You've given your nephew complete ownership of your property, effective immediately. The room started spinning. I had to grab the edge of his desk to keep from falling over. That can't be right. David said, David lied to you, look here. Fernando pointed to a section of the document I'd signed. This is called a quitclaim deed. It transfers your ownership interest in the property to David Martinez, with you retaining only life estate rights. What does that mean? It means David owns your ranch. You're allowed to live there until you die, but you can't sell it. You can't mortgage it. You can't make any decisions about it. And if David decides he wants you gone, Fernando's voice trailed off. He can make me leave my own home. It's not your home anymore, Rosa. Legally, you're just a tenant now. I think I might have blacked out for a minute. The next thing I remember, Fernando was holding my shoulders, making sure I was steady in the chair. There has to be something we can do, I whispered. Well, Fernando said slowly, there might be. But first, I need to ask you something very important. Before you signed these papers with David, had you signed any other legal documents recently? Any other wills or estate planning papers? No, I don't think so. Wait. Something was tickling, the back of my memory. Something important, and then it hit me like a lightning bolt. Fernando, do you remember about 3 years ago, right after Carlos died, you helped me with some papers? I was so grief-stricken I could barely think straight, but you said it was important to get certain things in order quickly for tax purposes. Fernando's eyes lit up. The emergency estate documents. Rosa, please tell me you remember what we did that day. It was coming back to me now, in fragments. I'd been so lost in grief, so overwhelmed by having to make decisions about things Carlos had always handled. Fernando had been so kind, so patient. He'd explained that there were certain legal protections I needed to put in place immediately to keep the government from taking a huge chunk of what Carlos and I had built. You had me sign something. Something about protecting the ranch from people who might try to take advantage of me while I was grieving. Rosa. Fernando's voice was barely controlled excitement. Do you remember the specific clause we included? The one about any future transfers of your property? And then it all came flooding back. The conversation, the concern in Fernando's voice, the way he'd insisted that this protection was crucial. You said anyone who tried to get me to sign away my property would have to go through an independent legal review first. That any documents signed without that review would be invalid, Fernando finished. Completely invalid. I stared at him. Are you saying... I'm saying that your nephew's little scheme just fell apart. Because the document you signed with him 3 years ago specifically states that any property transfer must be reviewed by an independent attorney, not a family member, and that both parties must receive separate legal counsel. But David is an attorney. Exactly, which means he knew or should have known that what he did was not only unethical, but legally worthless. For the first time in months, I smiled. Really smiled. So I still own my ranch. You still own your ranch. But Rosa... Fernando's expression grew serious again. Your nephew committed fraud. This isn't just a family misunderstanding. This is a crime. I sat back in that chair, and for the first time since Carlos died, I felt like maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe there was still some justice left in the world. But then Fernando said something that made my blood run cold. Rosa, there's something else. If David was willing to do this to you, there's a good chance he's not planning to wait patiently for nature to take its course. People who forge property deeds, they often have more aggressive timelines in mind. What do you mean? I mean, you might want to be very careful about what you eat and drink when your nephew comes to visit. The room went dead silent. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of the town. Cars driving by, people talking, life going on as usual. But inside Fernando's office, the implications of what he just said hung in the air like smoke. You think he would actually... I think people have killed for a lot less than 47 acres of prime ranch land, Rosa. And I think you need to be very, very careful. That's when everything changed. That's when I stopped being the grieving widow who trusted everyone and started being the woman who was going to fight for what was hers. But what happened next? What I discovered about David's real plans and how far he was willing to go, that's when this story gets really interesting. Because you see, I may be 67 years old, and I may have been naive enough to trust my nephew, but I didn't survive 67 years by being weak. And I definitely didn't build a ranch from nothing by backing down from a fight. David thought he was dealing with a helpless old woman. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. I left Fernando's office that day with two things: a copy of the protective documents I'd signed 3 years ago, and a plan that would make David regret the day he decided to mess with his tia Rosa. But first, I had to be smart about this. Fernando was right. If David was desperate enough to forge legal documents, there was no telling what else he might do. So I did something I'd never done before. I started documenting everything. I bought a small digital recorder, one of those tiny ones that looks like a pen, and I started carrying it everywhere. Every phone call, every visit, every conversation. If David was going to try to gaslight me or claim I was confused or senile, I was going to have evidence. I also did something else that might surprise you. I called my other nephews, Maria's older sons, Carlos and Miguel. I'd always been closer to David because he was the baby of the family, the one who seemed to need the most guidance. But Carlos and Miguel were good men, honest men, and they deserved to know what their little brother was up to. The conversation with Carlos broke my heart. "Tia Rosa, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with shame. "David told us you'd decided to put the ranch in a family trust to avoid estate taxes. He said it was your idea, that you wanted to make sure the property stayed in the family." "And you believed him?" "Why wouldn't we? He's a lawyer and honestly it seemed like something you might do. You've always been so generous with the family." That hurt. Not because Carlos believed David, but because it made me realize how carefully David had planned this. He'd told just enough truth, mixed with just enough lies, to make his story believable to everyone who loved me. But Miguel's reaction was different. "That son of a bitch," he said. And I'd never heard my quiet, gentle nephew use language like that before. "Tia, I'm coming out there tonight. Don't sign anything else. Don't talk to David without witnesses. And for God's sake, don't eat or drink anything he brings you." Fernando said the same thing about being careful. Fernando's right. "Rosa, there's something I need to tell you about David. Something I probably should have mentioned before." My blood went cold. "What?" "He's been having money problems." Big money problems. Jennifer's been pushing him to buy this expensive house, and he took out loans he can't afford. Last month he asked me for $20,000. Said it was just temporary, just until some big case settled. Did you give it to him? Hell no. I don't have that kind of money just lying around. But Rosa, if he's desperate enough to ask family for money and desperate enough to forge documents, he's desperate enough to do whatever it takes to get my ranch. Exactly. That night Miguel drove the 2 hours from the city to my ranch. He's a big man, works construction like his father did, and just having him there made me feel safer. We sat on the porch where Carlos and I used to spend our evenings, and I told him everything, every detail, every conversation, every red flag I'd ignored. "Tia, you know what we need to do, right? Expose him? Not just expose him. Destroy him. What he did to you. It's not just theft. It's elder abuse. It's fraud. It's taking advantage of someone he claimed to love." Miguel's hands were clenched into fists. He needs to pay for this in a way that makes sure he never tries it again, with you or anyone else. I looked out at my land My land, stretching out under the stars, the same stars Carlos and I used to watch together, making plans for our future that got cut short by his heart attack. This ranch wasn't just property to me. It was every sacrifice we'd made, every dream we'd built, every hope we'd had for our old age together. David had tried to steal all of that, to steal all of it, not just the land, but the meaning behind it. What do you have in mind? I asked. Miguel smiled, and for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I wasn't fighting this battle alone. We're going to give David exactly what he's asking for, but not the way he expects. Over the next few days, Miguel and I worked out our strategy. It was risky, and it required me to do some things that went against every instinct I had. But if it worked, David would wish he'd never heard the name Rosa Martinez. First, I called David. My hands were shaking as I dialed, but I forced my voice to sound weak, confused, defeated. "Mijo," I said when he answered. "I need to talk to you about something. Can you come out to the ranch this weekend? I'm having some problems." "Problems? What kind of problems, Tia?" "Perfect." I could hear the concern in his voice, but underneath it was something else. Anticipation. I keep getting confused about things, about the papers I signed, about what they mean, and Fernando Gutierrez. He's been calling me, asking questions about documents. I don't understand what he wants, and I'm scared I might have done something wrong. There was a pause. I could practically hear David's mind racing. "Don't worry about Fernando," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "He's just an old man who doesn't understand modern estate planning. Tell you what, why don't I come out Saturday morning and we can review everything together? Make sure you understand exactly what we did and why it was the best thing for everyone. Would you? I'd feel so much better if you explained it all again." "Of course, Tia. That's what family is for." After I hung up, I looked at Miguel. "He's coming Saturday." "Good. That gives us 3 days to get everything ready." Those 3 days were the longest of my life. Miguel and I went over the plan again and again, making sure every detail was perfect. We had one shot at this, and if we screwed it up, David would probably find a way to have me declared incompetent and take the ranch anyway. But we had advantages David didn't know about. The protective documents Fernando had helped me prepare years ago. The recordings I'd been making of all our conversations, and most importantly, the fact that David's greed was about to make him incredibly sloppy. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly. Perfect weather for what we had planned. David showed up at exactly 10 o'clock, dressed in his expensive suit and carrying that same manila folder he'd brought months earlier. But this time, Jennifer wasn't with him. This time, he was all business. "Tia Rosa," he said, giving me that practiced smile. "You sounded so worried on the phone. Let's sit down and clear up any confusion you might have." I led him into the living room, moving slowly, like I was suddenly feeling my age. Miguel was hidden in the back bedroom, recording everything through the slightly open door. "David, I'm so confused," I said, sitting down heavily. "Fernando keeps asking me about papers I signed, and I can't remember what they were for. And he keeps using words like fraud and invalid. I don't understand what he means." David's expression didn't change, but I caught a flash of something cold in his eyes. "Fernando is just stirring up trouble, Tia. Some people don't like it when families take care of their own business without paying lawyers. He's probably upset that you didn't use his services. But he says the papers I signed with you aren't legal. He says I can't transfer my property without some kind of independent review. That's ridiculous. I'm a licensed attorney in this state. Any documents I prepare are completely legal. This was it, the moment of truth. So you're saying the ranch really does belong to you now?" David hesitated for just a second, just long enough for me to know that he was choosing his words very carefully. "The ranch is protected now, Tia. It's in a family trust where it can't be taken by creditors or lost to taxes. You get to live here for the rest of your life, and when you're gone, it stays in the family instead of being sold to strangers. But who controls the trust? Another hesitation. I do, as the trustee, but only to protect your interests. So if you decided I needed to move to a nursing home, Tia, why would you even think about something like that? Could you make me leave? David's mask was starting to slip. I could see the impatience, the frustration that I wasn't just accepting his explanations like a good little old lady. Theoretically, if it was in your best medical interests, the trustee would have the authority to make those decisions. But Rosa, I would never. And if you decided to sell the ranch? Why are you asking all these questions? Don't you trust me? The room went dead quiet. Outside, I could hear the wind picking up, rattling the windows like it was trying to get in. I trusted you when I signed those papers, I said quietly. I trusted you because you're family, because I helped raise you, because I was proud of the man you became. You should still be proud. Should I, David? Should I be proud that my nephew tricked me into signing away everything his uncle and I worked for? Should I be proud that you lied to your own mother about what those papers really said? David stood up abruptly. I think you're getting confused again, Tia. Maybe you should talk to your doctor about medication for memory issues. And there it was. The threat I'd been waiting for. The suggestion that I was mentally incompetent, setting up his next move to have me declared unfit to make my own decisions. My memory is fine, David. In fact, it's better than you think. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small recorder, setting it on the coffee table between us. What is that? That's every conversation we've had for the past 2 months, including the one we just finished, where you admitted that you control my property and could force me out of my own home if you wanted to. David's face went white, then red, then a color I'd never seen before. You recorded me? Without my permission? In this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. I consented to recording mine. Tia? Sit down, David. Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he sat. Now I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen next. First, you're going to prepare new documents transferring ownership of my ranch back to me. Real documents this time, not forgeries. I never forged anything. Second, you're going to call your mother and your brothers and tell them the truth about what you did. Rosa, you don't understand the legal complexities. Third, you're going to pay for an independent attorney to review every document you've ever prepared for me to make sure there aren't any other little surprises. David was shaking now, actually shaking. And fourth, I continued, you're going to get help for whatever gambling or drug or spending problem is making you so desperate for money that you'd steal from the woman who helped raise you. I don't have a gambling problem. Then what's the $20,000 you asked Miguel for? What's the expensive house Jennifer wants? What's so important that you'd commit fraud to get it? David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You have 1 week, I said. 1 week to fix this, or I take my recordings, my documents, and my story to the State Bar Association, the district attorney, and every news station in the city. You wouldn't. Try me. That's when David made his biggest mistake. Instead of apologizing, instead of begging forgiveness, instead of trying to make things right, he got angry. You ungrateful old woman, he snarled. Do you have any idea what maintaining this place costs? What it's going to cost when you can't take care of yourself anymore? I was trying to help you. By stealing from me, by planning ahead, by making sure this property doesn't get eaten up by medical bills when you end up in a nursing home. Whose nursing home, David? One that you choose? One that would give you a nice commission for delivering a wealthy patient? His expression told me I'd hit closer to the truth than I'd even realized. Get out, I said quietly. Rosa, get out! David scrambled for his briefcase and folder, but I was faster. I grabbed the documents he'd brought and held them against my chest. These stay here, along with copies of everything you made me sign. You can't. I can and I will. You want them back? Bring me legal documents transferring my ranch back to me, signed by an independent attorney who's explained every word to me in both English and Spanish. David stood in my doorway looking like a stranger. Gone was the nephew I'd helped raise, the young man I'd been so proud of. In his place was someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of cruelty I never would have imagined. "This isn't over," he said. "You're right," I replied. "It's not." After he left, Miguel came out of the bedroom with the biggest grin I'd ever seen. "Tia, that was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Did you see his face when you pulled out that recorder?" I saw it. "But Miguel, this isn't finished. He's not going to just give up and walk away." "What do you mean?" "I mean, David is desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. We need to be ready for whatever he tries next." I was right to be worried, because what David tried next, it was worse than anything I could have imagined. That night, around 2 a.m, I woke up to the smell of smoke. Not the good kind of smoke, like from a fireplace or a barbecue. The wrong kind of smoke. The kind that means something is burning that shouldn't be. I stumbled out of bed and looked out my bedroom window toward the barn. Orange light was dancing against the walls, and I could hear the terrified sounds of my cattle. My barn was on fire. I called 911, threw on clothes, and ran outside with a garden hose, knowing it was useless, but unable to just stand there and watch everything burn. The fire department arrived 20 minutes later, but by then, the barn was gone, completely gone. 40 years of tools, equipment, feed, and memories reduced to smoldering ash. But here's what really scared me. The fire chief found evidence of accelerant. Someone had deliberately set my barn on fire. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, his face grim in the flashing lights of the fire trucks. "This was arson. Do you have any idea who might want to hurt you?" I looked at Miguel, who'd arrived just after the fire trucks. We both knew exactly who would want to hurt me. "Yes," I said. "I think I do." But proving it was going to be another matter entirely. The next morning, David called. His voice was smooth, concerned, helpful. "Tia Rosa, I heard about the fire. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" "I'm fine, David. Thank God. You know, this might actually be a blessing in disguise." "A blessing?" "Well, now you'll get the insurance money to rebuild, and you won't have to worry about maintaining that old barn anymore. In fact, this might be the perfect time to think about downsizing. Maybe selling the ranch and moving somewhere safer, somewhere closer to family who can keep an eye on you." And there it was, the real reason for the fire. David wasn't just trying to steal my ranch anymore. He was trying to terrorize me into giving it up willingly. "That's very thoughtful of you. To be concerned," I said, making sure my voice was steady. "But I'm not going anywhere. Rosa, be reasonable. You're 67 years old, living alone on a big property. Last night proved how dangerous that can be. What if the fire had spread to the house? What if you hadn't woken up in time? What if someone hadn't set the fire in the first place?" Silence. Long, telling silence. "Tia, that's a terrible thing to suggest. Who would do something like that?" "I don't know, David. Who would? Look, I'm coming out there today. We need to talk about your safety, about practical next steps. This conversation is too important for the phone. Don't bother. I won't be here." "Where are you going?" "Somewhere safe." I hung up and looked at Miguel. "It's time for phase 2. "What's phase 2? "We're going to give David exactly what he wants. We're going to make him think he's won." "Rosa, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about letting David believe that the fire worked, that I'm scared enough to sign over the ranch willingly." "Are you crazy?" "No, mijo, I'm angry, and I'm smart, and I'm about to show David that the biggest mistake he ever made was underestimating his Tia Rosa. What I did next, it was risky, it was complicated, and it required me to trust people I'd never met before. But it was also brilliant, even if I do say so myself. I called Fernando and told him I needed to see him immediately. Then I called a private investigator whose number Fernando gave me. And then I called someone I never thought I'd call in million years, a reporter from the city newspaper who specialized in elder abuse cases. Because if David wanted to play dirty, I was going to teach him exactly how dirty this old woman could play. 3 days later, David got exactly what he thought he wanted, a phone call from his terrified, defeated tia Rosa, begging him to come help her figure out how to sell the ranch and move to assisted living. What he didn't know was that his terrified, defeated tia Rosa had spent those 3 days setting a trap that would destroy him completely. The meeting was set for Saturday at noon. David was bringing Jennifer and a real estate agent. I was supposedly bringing my desperation and my defeat. What I actually brought was justice. At 11:45 a.m., David's car pulled up my driveway, but he wasn't alone. Following behind him were 2 other cars, one carrying the private investigator and his camera equipment, and one carrying the reporter and a photographer. At exactly noon, David knocked on my door. "Come in, mijo," I called out. "I'm in the kitchen." David walked in with Jennifer and a woman I didn't recognize, presumably the real estate agent. They all had the same expression, barely contained excitement mixed with fake sympathy. "Tia Rosa," David said, "I brought some people to help us figure out the best way to handle the sale. This is Monica. She's one of the top real estate agents in the area." "Mrs. Martinez," Monica said, extending her hand. "I'm so sorry about your barn. But David is right. This might be the perfect opportunity for a fresh start." "That's very kind," I said. "Can I offer everyone some coffee?" "That would be lovely," Jennifer said, looking around my kitchen like she was already planning renovations. I served the coffee, made small talk about the weather and the fire, and waited. At 12:15 there was another knock on the door. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm not expecting anyone." I opened the door to find Fernando, the private investigator, and the reporter standing on my porch. "Mrs. Martinez," the reporter said in a clear, carrying voice, "we're here about the elder abuse story we discussed. Is now a good time?" Behind me, I heard the sound of coffee cups hitting saucers. "Elder abuse." David's voice was tight. "Tia, what's going on?" I turned around to face my nephew, and for the first time in months, I felt completely in control. "What's going on, David, is that you're about to become very famous. Mr. Johnson here is an investigative reporter who specializes in financial crimes against the elderly. He's been very interested in your little property transfer scheme." David was on his feet, his face white. "Rosa, what are you doing?" "I'm doing what I should have done months ago. I'm stopping you." "Mrs. Martinez," the reporter said, stepping into my kitchen with his recorder running. "Can you tell us about the documents your nephew had you sign?" "I'd be happy to." I pulled out a thick folder of papers. "These are copies of the fraudulent deed transfer my nephew tricked me into signing, along with recordings of our conversations where he admits to controlling my property." "That's not fraud," David shouted. "Those documents were prepared legally." "By a family member," Fernando said, stepping forward, in direct violation of the protective clauses Mrs. Martinez had already signed with independent counsel. "And," the private investigator added, "we have evidence suggesting that when fraud didn't work, you resorted to arson to intimidate your aunt into giving up her property." Jennifer was backing toward the door. "I don't know anything about any of this. I'm just here to help with real estate." "Actually," the reporter said, "we have recordings of you telling people at the grocery store that the family ranch would be available soon. Would you like to explain how you knew that before Mrs. Martinez had decided to sell?" The room erupted. David was shouting about entrapment. Jennifer was crying. Monica was trying to slip out the back door. And Fernando was explaining to the reporter exactly how the fraud had been perpetrated. In the middle of all the chaos, I sat down at my kitchen table and smiled. This was better than I had ever imagined. But the best part, the absolute best part, came 3 hours later, after the reporter had gotten his story, after the private investigator had gathered his evidence, and after David had been escorted off my property by the sheriff's deputies who'd arrived to take his statement about the arson investigation. My phone rang. It was Maria. "Rosa, I just saw the news. David really did what they're saying." "Yes, Maria, he did." There was a long pause. Then quietly, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Hermana. He's my son. I raised him." "How? Did I raise someone who could do this to family?" "You raised 2 other sons who would die before they'd hurt someone they love. Don't blame yourself for David's choices. What happens now? Now? Now David faces the consequences. The State Bar Association is reviewing his license. The district attorney is considering charges. And me, I'm going to rebuild my barn and live my life exactly the way Carlos and I planned." 6 months later, David's law license was suspended, pending a full investigation. He and Jennifer lost the expensive house they couldn't afford. He's currently working as a paralegal and living in a studio apartment, trying to pay back the money he owes and hoping to avoid jail time. Miguel helped me rebuild the barn. It's bigger and better than the old one, with modern fire suppression systems and security cameras. The insurance money covered most of it. And what it didn't cover, well, let's just say that sometimes justice comes with a small profit margin. I still live on my ranch. I still grow vegetables and raise cattle and watch the sunset from my porch every evening. But now I also do something else. I volunteer with the local elder abuse prevention program, helping other seniors recognize and report financial fraud. Because here's what I learned from all this. Predators count on their victims being too embarrassed, too confused, or too isolated to fight back. They count on us feeling helpless, but we're not helpless, we're not confused, and we're definitely not alone. The ranch that Carlos and I built with our own hands is still mine. It will always be mine. And when I die, which won't be for a long, long time if I have anything to say about it, it will go to people who actually love me, not people who see me as a source of income. David thought he could steal my life's work because I'm 67 years old and live alone and trusted my family. He thought wrong. And if anyone else out there is thinking about taking advantage of their elderly relatives, thinking they can get away with it because old people don't fight back, well, they can think again. Because this 67-year-old woman just proved that age is just a number and justice doesn't have an expiration date. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have cattle to feed and a sunset to watch. Some things never change, and thank God for that.